Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Trivett, and I'm the head of Special Collections and College Archives here at the Fashion Institute of Technology, part of the State University of New York. It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2019, at approximately 1 in the afternoon, and I am thrilled today to offer you another installment of FIT Talks, which is the oral history program of the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I'm thrilled today to have as very special guests former professors, faculty here at FIT, Arthur Winters and Peggy Winters. And welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Always.
Very good, very good. Well, I am so excited to get this conversation started. So I'm just going to start with a little contextual prodding. If you will, tell researchers a little bit about each of you, your childhoods.
Wow. Well, I probably had in mind various types of marketing and promotion
Wow.
at the age of 5
Oh my goodness.
because I wanted to make extra money, for whatever budget I needed. And I came up with, after seeing it and observing what was happening on the beaches of New Rochelle, New York,
Oh.
where we lived just about a block or so away from the beach, Hudson Park it was called. I saw various young people carrying ice boxes around and selling ice cream on the beach. And I decided that if I could do something with that in a way that possibly I might be able to make ice cream sales on the beach something special.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a hold of the people who were running it. My father happened to be fairly important in our hometown, New Rochelle, New York. He had a printing business there, and he really was what you might call an amateur magician.
Oh wow.
He knew he was a member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians, IBM, which had Harry Houdini in it, famous name in magic. And my father gave me a lot of experience that I never would have had at an early age if he hadn't been involved in all kinds of different things with different kinds of people. So I, at a very early age, I began to think about ways to earn a living. And my father, being in the printing business, started to think, and I could draw. I always had the ability to draw and do that thing, even from an early age. I could do various types of cartoons and that type of thing. And he would give me assignments whenever he got a customer who wanted what you might call a directly personal brochure of themselves.
Oh my, yes.
One that could dramatize and proclaim and actually present a person's skills and what they had to offer. And so at a very early age, I was given the job of producing these little catalogs. Some of them were for fairly well-known people. But it gave me a lot of practice in art and copy. And that became, in a sense, a occupational adventure, art and copy. And at a fairly early age, I started to do various types of things my father would give me as assignments for, and doing the art, if it was a little brochure. Have you got a picture of it?
No, go ahead.
Of the one I did for my father?
On my phone.
Okay, it's on her phone. Anyway, I did one for my father, and it was a picture, my father being pretty much of a magician, amateur magician who belonged to the International Brotherhood. I drew a picture of him pulling a skunk out of a hat.
Oh.
Didn't want to do a rabbit because everybody was doing
Yes.
that. See? So he had a friend who was a skunk, and a very friendly skunk. Didn't use powers that be.
Very docile.
Right. At any rate, having that kind of background, very early in my life, I was able to do various forms of art and copy. And it gave me what you might call entrance into various types of work. The war broke out when I was 17, World War II.
Goodness.
And I had the choice, I was a senior in high school, I had the choice of being drafted or enlisting. And so I decided to enlist, and it began a whole career for me. I enlisted in the Navy, and the Navy has become, in a sense, a support for me in almost everything I've ever done.
Amazing.
That's personally and professionally and in every other way.
How long were you in the Navy?
I was released from the Navy at the age of 74.
Oh.
From inactive duty. You were in the active
they
duty.
They kept me on what they call inactive duty.
Amazing.
And which means I could get various types of assignments for referencing, doing lectures and that sort of thing. And every now and then I'd get called to do something. But the whole idea...
It also took you to Williams College. Your Navy career
Oh yeah, my Navy
connected you to
career
Williams College.
really did me a wonderful service. During World War II, many of the colleges in this country had what you might call military programs. And they would have a kind of coordination with various associations in the military to do a job. They sent me to a college which turned out to be one of the leading colleges in the country. It's Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts.
It's the #1 liberal arts college in the country.
And I really had an experience there. Since all those years ago, World War II, I've helped develop the Williamstown Theater. I worked with a movie actor, you may remember Paul Newman, and and his partner Joanne Woodward to create the Williamstown Theater.
Just incredible.
So it's been a very, very fortunate experience to have good choices, which were fortunate, in giving me opportunities that I might not have had.
Well, that's just
And
a
I'm
lovely
grateful.
recollection.
I'm so grateful for everything that I was able to get out of these experiences.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay.
Peggy.
Well, on the other end of the country, out in Iowa, which is where I come from, and a town called Ottumwa. And if anyone knows Ottumwa, it will be because of Radar O'Reilly in the MASH show, where his character came from Ottumwa, Iowa.
Wow.
Another person, Tom Arnold, is also from there. And I'm sure there are others, but those are the two most recognizable. And so what I consider myself as a small town girl who spent her summers on the farm, her grandmother's farm. I had 300 people in my high school. Only 100 in each class. It was sophomore to senior. And in my junior year, the fashion coordinator from the local fashion store in Ottumwa came to look for teen representatives to create the Young Iowa Teen Board. So the Seifert store, which was throughout Iowa, each town had their representatives from the local high schools, which of course was to bring in other shoppers from that target market. And so when I walked in for that interview, Jeannie said she knew immediately that I was the one. You know, it was just absolutely, I was dressed the right part, she just knew it. So my presentation and my interest in retail began then, and in fashion specifically, and I looked, all my counselors were saying, you have to go to college, you have to go to college, and I kept saying, for what? I don't know what I want yet. I don't know what to do. What's out there for me? Well, when this happened, when this job happened, then it was like, oh my gosh, there's something I can do and like doing. So I got involved in not only retail sales, but then fashion promotions, display, special events, public relations, writing fashion shows, modeling, and getting into the full feature of what fashion promotion is all about.
No stone unturned.
Yeah, so that certainly started the process. And then at that point, my boss said, well, why don't you get a degree in fashion merchandising? So at one of the community colleges in Iowa, I was able to do that, continue my love of fashion shows and modeling and doing all of that, and being behind the scenes, starting to do commercials, voiceovers, all that. And then I said, there's more to life than just this level. Now I'm ready to go back for my bachelor's degree. So I had a 2-year degree, then I went on for the bachelor's degree. And I went to Memphis State University at the time. My parents had gotten a transfer. My dad transferred with his company down to Memphis. And he said, well, hey, here's an opportunity. Nice state school, not too expensive. They've got, come and see if you'd like to go here. So then that got into the marketing and education. I also have a degree in education. So I love what I do. I love to teach what I do. I've always been a coach for other people. So it all fell into a beautiful combination of education and marketing.
Nice.
So that was the background. And I also traveled. My parents had 6 weeks vacation every year.
Oh, wow.
So we took 2 weeks here, there, and everywhere. I've been in 48 of the 50 states. So that Midwest positioning and that coverage of the country gave me that sense of curiosity and observation. And from Memphis, I came on a course in my master's program to come up to New York to do a tour of New York City and the fashion industry. And as I was listening to all these executives talk about what they wanted in the people they hire, I was sitting there going, I've done that. Okay, I've done that. I've done that. What's the big deal about New York? So that distance, and I'd lived in many, many different places around the country. So I'm not afraid of moving and not afraid of moving on no money. So I moved to New York with, I think, about $700 in my bank account. And I had worked for some fashion marts. So the executives had come out of New York. I also had worked at another store, Day Brothers in Syracuse, New York. So I had connections in New York City and did my interviews and that was in '76 when I came to New York. And I said, well, I'll try this. And had 5 interviews and lo and behold got 5 offers. And from Vogue to Bloomingdale's to Allied Stores and among others. And I said, Allied Stores offered me something I hadn't thought about, which was in their direct marketing department and catalogs and advertising. And I thought, oh, this is great. They see something in me I didn't know to ask for. So that's where I landed my first job. Within 6 months, I said, more to life than the bottom line. I've got to get back into academia where people talk about big ideas and are helping other people.
And it's something, you talk about happenstance. I was on my way at a certain time to do something I was in love with, and it was called scuba diving.
Oh.
In those days with a tank and all of that. And fortunately, the phone rang as I was halfway out the door. And I don't know what made me say, come on, I'm going on vacation, I'm not gonna. But I answered it for some reason. And it was a colleague of mine I was the chair of a department at the college, and a colleague of mine who was in a different department said, oh, there's a young lady here who wants to talk about what?
Well, it was Newt Godnick, and I thought my background, more years in retail and advertising and promotion, but smaller on the advertising side. So I was meeting with Newt Godnick.
But he decided.
He said, I think you'd be better, because you're working in advertising, in Art Winters' department, advertising and communications.
That was my
So he said, let me see if he's still here.
And now, which college are we talking about?
Business and technology.
Oh, here at
FIT. Here at
Very
FIT.
good.
Yeah.
We fast forwarded a little bit.
Yeah, sorry
I'm
about
sorry.
that. Yeah, that wasn't
all
quite
good.
there.
Anyway, just like everything else, you never know when something is part of the fortune. And I decided
To say, okay, I'll wait. I'm on my way. I've got about an hour.
Yeah.
So send her up. So Newt took me up to meet him. And the interesting thing was, having been in education and distributive educations, and I was the national vice president of DECA. I had done a speech in Montclair, New Jersey, and one of the students there was a graduate of FIT, and she said, do you know anyone at FIT? I said, no. I said, if it's the last thing I do in New York, I'm going to teach at FIT in my speech. She said, call Newt Godnick. He was my chair. So that's how I made the connection to Newt, and then Newt connected me and said I should teach.
I have to say, I was intrigued professionally and emotionally. It was a nice combination. I got together with my friends and we went scuba diving in Aruba and that sort of thing. And I was swimming around, and the coral in those days was more prevalent than it is today, underwater coral. And you have to be careful with it because it has openings, and if you get into the opening, it's almost impossible to get out. And sure enough, that happened to me.
Oh, good.
And I said to myself, if I can't get my hand out of here and I'm floating,
Whoop,
oh,
honey,
thank you.
that's all right.
I'm floating around in the water, stuck in the coral, floating around. I say, if I don't get out of here, I'm not going to get back to call Peggy Fincher. And I pulled my hand out, dislocated 2 fingers.
He came back in a splint. His hand was in a splint. And he's telling me this story, and I said,
I don't know if she believed it.
I said, whoa, I don't know about this. Is this for real? Well, okay, let's, anyway.
And that's
he said professionally, that was December of 76. So he said class is available not until summer of 77. So that's when I started teaching and then proceeded.
We did test what you might call syllabi and teaching and teachers in the summer. And that's one of the things.
And we had to exhibit what we would teach and how we would use the syllabus and work with the students and all. And again, it was one of those perfect fits, just like when the lady from Seifert said, "You're it," and he said, my life in business was everything in the AC 111 class.
Oh, yes.
And that for the book that he had written for that class.
Well, everything had to be done by us. For instance, when I started teaching some of the first classes, there were no textbooks or anything, around.
With fashion advertising.
Or fashion advertising, or even good books. I had contributed a couple of chapters to what was available in books on advertising. So I had some experience in doing some writing. And so I decided if I wanted to have books for my courses and that thing, I had to write them.
Yes.
We together, how many have we?
Well, you've written 9 textbooks.
9 textbooks.
And versions of. And we've done
I contributed to a couple
of others.
textbooks to start with.
Oh, wait, back it up. When I was in my junior college merchandising, I had Jeanette Jarno's The Fashion Business book, and Jeanette Jarno being one of the main founders of the FBM department here. And so in my school, we used that textbook, and one of the chapters was by Arthur.
I wrote one of the chapters.
So I always said
Advertising.
I met him before I met him. So, and our links of the people we knew around the country in universities of education, whom I'd worked with DECA, and he had worked with at Temple University with his doctorate. We all of us, when we started talking, we said, well, how about these people and these people? And we knew all the same people and had very similar business backgrounds, coincidentally, from very different walks of life.
Yes.
But again, it was all of that just brought everything together in professional and personal ways.
Well, we actually have wound up, so fortunately, we've taught in 17 different countries.
What?
Yes.
Yeah. We've
More
written
about that.
we've written 3 books too to
We've
back
writ-
up that
we've written-
our industry books.
We've
Yeah,
written industry books, 3.
videotapes. So we've done all sorts
Right.
of.
And
projects.
those experiences were wonderful. I was still running part-time my advertising agency, still doing business with some clients that I'd had connection with many years, and it all worked out. But the FIT and everything it offered us, as well as what we could come through and offer it,
Contribute. Yeah.
Yes.
contribute.
Well,
Wonderful.
one year, and I'm not sure exactly how it started, but we started talking about overseas programs. Some tours had been taken, some departments were taking students on tours, but we are very practical, and well, to interject here, the idea of the internship program. Every college I was connected with had internships, practicums, work studies. So when I didn't see one for the advertising students, a formal one, there was the co-op work in FBM, but there wasn't anything for students to get into the corporate world. So I said, I went into his office one day and I said, "Where's the internship program?" And he goes, "Well, we sort of do it casually. You know, when a student needs experience, we'll link them
Yeah,
up
we
with,
were doing it,
with one of our
informally.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Getting
we'll
students
monitor them
internship.
and that sort of thing. And I said, "Yeah, but I mean, I come from Podunk, Iowa, for Pete's sakes. We had them in every community college." And I said, "Maybe it's because you're on 7th Avenue, you think you don't need it, but to get in the corporate offices, we need to help these students cross that bridge." And so he said to me, "Well, create it." So I said, "Well, okay." So back to my office I went, and Shirley Milton had a card file of some of her contacts, and we started building it. I did it on a volunteer basis to start with. The students did it on a volunteer basis until we went through the whole process, curriculum
Yeah,
committee,
Shirley
everything,
Milton.
to get
Yeah.
the credits and to build the program, and then get me hired as the director of the internships
And I-
for our
I'm sorry, go ahead.
for the business and technology division, and then for the whole college.
And now you've mentioned FBM a couple of times. For
Right.
listeners who aren't familiar with our jargon here
Yes.
at FIT, what does that stand for?
At that time, it was fashion buying and merchandising. Now it's fashion business management. Now it's fashion business management.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And Arthur's department was first advertising and communications, and then when he started the first 4-year program here at FIT for a bachelor's, it became advertising, communications, and marketing. So then it grew into a bigger.
Well, the term communications, I remember when I first tried to use it and name a course for it, the State University of New York said, "What the heck is that?" Well, what do you mean?
Yeah, what does communication have to do with
What does
marketing?
that have to do with marketing?
Please.
I said everything.
Yeah.
And
In a word.
eventually we were able to do it. But the whole thing has been not only a learning experience for those wonderful students, but for us.
Oh, always,
And always. And it was any time you could develop a course that would fit in with your general objectives and your specific objectives, we would want to teach.
Yes.
And some of the courses that we taught, it was a rule for us that they had to come through with a presentation of their own. Something that they could show people in addition to a resume. Here's something I came up with for da-da-da-da-da, whatever objective
Right.
they wanted.
Right.
And all of the courses had, in a sense, an opportunity not only to learn, but learn by doing.
And on the business and technology side, it's our product, whether it's a business plan or an advertising campaign or a public relations kit. You know, these are all the products that we produce and that our students produce. So, and it became, going back to the question of international, it became obvious that we needed to be more international and have our students have that experience.
Right.
So I also knew personally, to get Arthur out of his office for any length of time, we needed to have a work purpose, because we weren't really Tammy and Tommy Teresa. We needed to be, Dr. and Professor Winters, in our travels. So this created an idea that I said, why don't we set up a program in England where the language is not a problem. And we started talking and working on the idea of not only the curriculum where we'd teach international public relations, but the students would also take a British course, and then we'd have internships in British companies.
British.
And so that combination,
Very
and we did
important.
that for 8 summers.
Oh.
And then we
8
turned that
years.
over. We turned it over to our colleagues. And when we were going on to do other things, which was to go to France, to the Institut Commercial de Nancy, and then to Italy, to Polimoda, and to what was the other school that we were at? The SUNY school in the other part of Italy, which escapes me now.
Oh, the Firenze?
No. Anyway, so we went various places in Italy, and then
Oh, yeah.
since
It
then,
was north. Yeah.
yeah, I can't think of it. Then Korea. We went to South Korea and Japan. We were invited by Samsung and Asahi. And so Yoko Ohara from Asahi was one of our main contacts to bring her people here from Japan and to take experts from the industry and us to give lectures and conferences in Japan. And after that, then we went to China,
Really?
and we worked many years in China
When was this?
in the 80s, right?
Oh.
It was
90s, early 90s?
It was a different
Early 90s.
situation.
Yes.
Pre-horrible pollution, I must say.
Yeah.
We didn't encounter any of the pollution. But we started programs. We worked with Donghua, who still is a connection for the college now. We were in 10 different cities in China. And we worked with students.
Been around.
And we were sponsored by the China Advertising Association,
Yep.
which is much larger than our 4As here.
And much more what
yeah.
you might call specialists.
Yeah,
There was an advertising agency that did nothing but design labels
for wine bottles.
for wine bottles.
The government held them into very straight and strict units. So you, agency A, you can do
You can
newspaper.
do this, and you can do this.
Agency B, you can do television commercials. Agency C, you can do wine bottle labels. And I mean, they had very strict direct marketing. Each one had they had rules for separating all these at that time. So we had a wonderful interaction with the CAA.
And in the work we were doing, the writing we were doing and everything, some of these experiences were illuminating for us to know how many different approaches people were making
Brazil,
for the
I
same
forgot.
thing.
Yeah, we
You know,
also,
and it, being able to, you might say, come up with a whole range of different projections of what you might call the manner of presenting advertising was expanding because of what you might call technology
Right.
and the thing.
Well,
Even if it wasn't called advertising, there was a lot of technology that carried messages that were not labeled as advertising, but there was some form of marketing and marketing
and communications, yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Well, each of the countries that came to FIT, their big question was, what is marketing? The United States was known, and their advertising agencies created the concept
What kind
of
of word is
marketing
that?
beyond advertising, bigger than advertising, including all of these things. So they came to us, and we became the couple that was the most likely to be able to share that with them as to what is marketing.
And to have it more than
Yeah.
a definition with one sentence or two. But marketing is something you couldn't explain in a short, you know, a short kind of positioning of intention and where you're going with a particular story about a product or a service or anything that you want to introduce and then sell.
And then culturally, the differences in Brazil, when we were in Brazil,
Yeah.
and the college worked with the Escola Superior de Marketing y Propaganda.
Propaganda.
And
That word is different in Espanol.
so, in
Propaganda.
Portuguese.
When I first heard it, propaganda, I thought it was talking about a very nice, polite duck. A propaganda. so I wasn't sure.
But we had wonderful experiences in Brazil, and also the school in São Paulo, which is going to escape my mind right now. So we worked with 2 different schools there. We also worked with a gentleman from Adweek in the advertising seminars that we did there. And then Moscow, and then we went to Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Russia.
And again, those were people who came to this college to seek professionals who could come and represent marketing thinking from the United States.
And it made connections. It formed connections.
Yeah.
Yes, a recent example of that is Cuba.
Oh, yeah?
There's been a faction in communication with FIT to get some pedagogical advice.
Great. Are we going to be allowed to go?
Yeah.
I do not know. It's been some months since
Yes.
that original conversation took place. So
Yeah.
I don't know, given our...
Yeah, Turkey, we had people from Turkey and Greece, and
Oh, wow.
I mean, Kenya. One of the best stories was we went after our
We had
teaching.
quite an experience in
After our
Kenya.
teaching in England, we would take time to go somewhere in the world as a vacation. So Professor Gilbert Kahn was with us in England at that time, and so the 3 of us went to Africa and Kenya and Tanzania. And we said, Arthur had a student that he had coached, actually an adult, who was involved with the textile industry in Kenya.
Yeah.
And
it was a connection.
Yes.
so we said, hey, let's see if we can find Obaja Awili. And so we're at the
He was
lodge, the
my
Safari
student.
Lodge,
Yes.
and we go to the phone booth, and at the time when there were phone books, and actual phones, and pre-cell phones. So we go to call, and on the 5th call, because the first guy goes, oh, call this guy. Oh, no, call this guy. Oh, yeah, I know him. Yeah, call this guy. On the 5th call, Arthur's saying, is Obaja Awili there? And the man goes, oh, yeah, he's right here. He hands the phone across the desk.
And I hear screaming.
He's screaming, my professor, my professor, my professor. Now this had been, 20 years or more between when he had been at FIT as a young man, and now he's an adult with 5 wives and
He had 3
5
that
wives.
we met.
We met 3 of his wives.
They had a party for us,
Well-
and he brought 3 of his wives.
Yeah, his son had won a scholarship to a college in Russia. But it would pay for the college, but not getting there, coming back, and of course living expenses. So they were having a party. They called it a tea. Now we're
It's a
thinking
way to
British
raise
colony
money for something,
in
right.
Africa. We're thinking, the Queen's tea. There wasn't a spot of tea anywhere. It was this fundraiser that we came into, and they started. All of the people had come to bring and donate money to this son's opportunity to study engineering in Russia. And it was so exciting, and we didn't know what we came off the safari, we're still in our safari clothes, and here we are at this thing. And it was quite, I wish I had a videotape of it.
Oh, yes.
It's in my mind, but
But our relationships, I mean, to put it even mildly, have done so much to give us unbelievable experience we never would have been able to attain,
Yes.
and then help us within those experiences expand
Yes.
the whole.
Sort of maximize the opportunity.
absolutely. And bring it back to our
Very well
students who
put.
couldn't go,
Maximize the
take
opportunity.
students with us who could experience this.
Yes.
And now the explosion of all the international programs and all the places to the Philippines and Thailand and Taiwan and China and all the places that the
really-
students are going to work and study.
Exactly.
It is what is needed. I think the main message we got in each country we were in, when you would speak privately with our individual handlers or the professionals we worked with, if they felt they could speak out loud at that moment, they would say, if it weren't for our governments, we'd all be fine. We all like each other. We all like learning from each other. Sure, we're going to have healthy competition and try to best the other one with our ideas, but this idea of not getting along just is not the way we feel as individuals. And they very much felt they needed to tell us this, especially in China and Russia,
Well,
in those 2 particular places.
the slogan for my advertising agency, a lot of people question this. because my slogan, I had it in the Empire State Building, on the 65th floor, and my slogan was, "There's no such thing as an original idea."
Wow.
And people would say to me, are you crazy?
But that's what we're hiring you for, come on.
Well, I said, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to work on what other people have done and build on it. But there's no such thing as coming up with anything. We work with each other. We work for each other and from each other. And that's something to think about.
Absolutely.
And building ideas have to have something to build on.
Exactly.
Ideas which are already there.
Yeah.
And it's something.
Well,
And-
tell us a little bit about your agency.
What?
About your
Tell us
agency.
a little bit about your agency.
My agency had what you might call a variety of clients. And of course, the one client that really changed my life was Kay Jewelers.
Oh, wow, really?
And Kay, and they were a client, not for me to do anything creative for them. I sold them advertising space. I was working because of my first marriage Barbara from North Carolina. Peggy met her. I was working for a newspaper in Charlotte, North Carolina, called the Charlotte Observer. And one of my clients they gave me to sell space to, I would do a little more than selling space. It's changed my life, Kay Jewelers.
Yes.
I would give them ideas for their ads, not just say, do you want to run a half page? Or do you want to run a couple of columns? I would say, here's something that you might deal with some of your leading people, as an idea for connecting with your customers and your prospective customers. And it got to a point where I began to deal with Kay as a consultant.
Oh,
And they said to me on the newspaper, Pryor, Hamlin, Bat, the editor, said, Arthur, I don't know if I should tell you this, but you could teach.
oh, wow.
He'd heard what I was doing with Kay,
Yes.
and he says, I'm going to recommend you to King College
Oh,
here in Charlotte. And that started my whole life.
amazing.
I got a job with King College, and teaching became a wonderful thing.
But then you came back, when you came back to New York, that was another thing we shared.
Yeah.
He worked for Independent Retailer Syndicate, which
were
was, again, a
semi-client.
corporate office. He was in charge of the advertising for all the retail stores that they worked
It was
with.
a big job.
My first job was with Allied, when I came to New York City, was with Allied Stores, in charge of direct marketing for all of the stores we owned. We actually owned them. And so here we another experience we shared of having that background, and you left that to open your agency here in the city with a couple of partners and then on your own, and you ended up with the agency in the 65th floor of the Empire State
65th
Building.
floor of the Empire State.
With Playtex as one of his accounts.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's how I got
When
into
was that?
fashion.
When was that?
One of my first accounts, because they happened to be a neighbor
The timeline.
up there.
When?
Oh, when I was beginning to do my agency.
And the
thing.
year would be?
Oh, 1950.
Was before you were at FIT, which was 1959.
Yeah, it was in the early 50s.
Early 50s.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, early mid-50s, yeah.
early mid-50s. Where was I?
Yeah. So Playtex.
Oh, the Playtex. So one of my first accounts, because of they happened to have some empty space that they never used.
In their offices there.
And my offices happened to be there. And it was an opportunity to meet them.
Yes.
That, I was given that space just to try out. And so I met the people in Playtex, and they became my client. That's a
Fantastic.
big company.
Yes.
And so people said, he's in fashion advertising. And that started my whole career with FIT
Crazy.
and everything else.
My
How
God.
did- how did you come
I
to
was
teach
asked to
at
teach
FIT?
fashion advertising.
And who was it, Nate? Was it Nate or?
It was
or
one of
Sid?
the teachers here locally. It was mainly Jeanette Jarno.
But before that, no, it was either Nate or
Well, they were here about the same time.
yeah, but the one you met in the industry that recommended you to see Jeanette.
Oh.
It was Nate Axelrod, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Nate. It was Nate. He was one of them. Yeah, Nate Axelrod.
Yeah, there were a couple of teachers at FIT who knew Arthur in the industry.
From industry connections.
Yes.
And they said, maybe he could teach here.
Yeah.
But
and that was the
it was
same
such
thing with me, with a contact that said you should speak to Newt, and the direction that that brought us in.
Sent her up that thing when I decided, all right, I'll answer the phone.
That fateful moment.
Yeah.
That fateful
Yes.
moment.
And it began a whole new era.
So for both of you individually, what experiences stand out for you? You've touched on some of those with your international work, your internship work, but are there other discrete experiences that stand out for you during your tenure at FIT?
At FIT, there's so many.
Yeah, there's like every single one.
Yeah.
I think, well, I know when the Limited was working with us and with President Feldman, we did so many projects, each of us individually and together with President Feldman.
Oh, wow.
And when the
Marvin
Limited,
Feldman.
yeah, when the Limited company came and wanted to do some projects with us, I was very proud to be involved in that and to help work with their executives, and then later a girlfriend of mine happened to be a vice president at Victoria's Secret.
Oh.
So weaving in and out of the industry, you just know so many people and interact.
And my great, if I have to thank the good Lord or every happening, it was to meet Marvin Feldman.
Yeah, he was such a special
We had many
guy.
conversations together. I would go up almost every afternoon for
Really?
an afternoon
Cocktail.
cocktail. I'm glad you gave me that word.
Yes, yes.
And
Spirits.
it was wonderful
Spirited talks
talking
with
with him
spirits.
because he had a wonderful, wonderful mind for development.
Oh, yes.
He really did.
It was really progressive, very progressive. He
And
knew that we needed to have
He knows-
higher level degrees.
He made many things
he thought he didn't ever want to let go of the 2-year, and that is one of his solid points. Was because, and he and I shared that and talked about that. Is that having come from a 2-year degree and how important that was to get me started, and for students who either don't have the money or don't have the confidence to launch into a 4-year degree. Or for me, I didn't want to repeat liberal arts off the bat. I was just in high school. I just did all that. Give me something tangible to do, to be responsible for, something practical in life. That was where my head came from. And then after that, then the history and English and all the science and everything became more valuable to me in my junior, senior year. So I kind of flipped my major to, kind of flipped it on its head, so that I believed in that very much. Give kids a shot. And then, of course, the 1-year program where we bring students who have degrees and are working on degrees at other colleges. That was so good to feed that in from other parts of the country. And I think those programs were critical to our
They were advantageous.
very important for our development, as well as working the students into what we felt was good for them in their future.
Well, you've told us a little bit about your backgrounds, reaching back sometimes to age 5, but I'm curious about your formal education. You've mentioned the 2-year program you ran, and you mentioned Williams College, but if you tell listeners what your formal education is, that would be great.
Williams College was my college, and then I have a master's degree, an MBA from Pace University, which is very much in the markets, as you might say. And then I have a Doctor of Education from Temple University.
Wonderful.
It took me 3 years to do it.
Wow.
And it was an experiment to qualify me for a doctorate of education by doing something very different. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but what I did is I convinced a teacher whom I met, who'd been teaching a course similar to one that a teacher I knew very well had been teaching. And I got them considering one of them, the one I knew, had industry background more so than the other, way more so. The other was teaching a course similar, but I did an experiment to determine who would do the most for students.
Right.
Somebody, a teacher who had this, or a teacher who had this and that, that type of thing. And it was a very well received by the group. You know, they had kind of a jury
Yes.
that met to determine whether you're okay for the doctorate. And you know, I always took chances in my life.
This is a good
Always
story.
did.
This is good.
I always do a good thing. And I figured, what the hell? Everybody goes up and says, well, I want to accomplish this, and I want to accomplish that. I said, I'm going to maybe give them something to have some fun with.
So they say,
I'm
why,
a chance taker, you know?
Yeah.
the committee asks,
So,
why do you,
Why do you want to be a doctor of
Yeah.
education? Why do you want to be a doctor? I says, well, when I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, my hometown, my best friend was Philip Astor. His mother had a store on Main Street in New Rochelle, and my mother and father had a store on Main Street in New Rochelle. And every time they'd meet, Philip's mother, he became an MD, would say, let me tell you about my son, the doctor. And my mother couldn't say anything. So when I came in front of the committee to determine whether I had done enough years of work and everything to earn a doctorate, a doctor of education, I said, well, I got a very important thing to tell you. For years, I've had to listen to my mother meeting Mrs. Astor on Main Street in Rochelle. She says to her, I want to tell you about my son, the doctor. Now my mother, for the first time,
on the
may be
streets of
able-
heaven,
on the streets of New Rochelle, may be able to say, I
In
want
heaven.
to tell you about my son, the doctor.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And they loved it.
I mean, it was so refreshing.
I took a
That's just-
chance. I took a chance. But I found in my life that sometimes doing something different, taking a chance, it might be risky,
Yeah.
but you got to
never
do
know
it.
until you try.
Yeah, I found that if you never take a chance, for instance, my father told me this story at a very early age. I was in my teens. He said one day, one of the people who were working in his printing business came in after the year was up and said, sir, I have something to tell you. The year has passed. I haven't made a single mistake. You know what my father said? You're fired. That's a story he told me.
Yes.
I think it was true, but he told me that story to show me that people who don't take a chance are not risky, are not going to provide anything of any
Exactly.
value.
Yes.
That life is a series of some chances you might take and work at it. And if you say, I'm never going to take a chance, I'm going to play it safe,
If that were the case,
Doesn't work.
I'd still be in Iowa.
Yes.
So that's, right?
that's right.
So taking
You gotta take
chances.
chances and then work
Yeah.
at it.
Yes.
And it's
So my college background, as I said, working in a retail environment and getting into the fashion industry, my boss telling me, get this fashion merchandising program. So that was my first 2 years, working all the while through it. And then working a full year, full-time out in Omaha, Nebraska, which was definitely not a mix and match for me. So I was, within 3 months, I was like, I got to get out of here. And I said, you know, I think I'll go back to college. And I even thought about joining the Air Force in order to afford to get my college paid for. But that then didn't happen when my dad got transferred to Memphis, Tennessee. And he said, why don't you come down here and go to, check out Memphis State University, now the University of Memphis. And so I went down there and I got into the education well, I didn't know that you couldn't minor in education. You have to major in education. So I minored in marketing. So I have those 2 degrees. And then from there, I started the master's program. And when I came on that course to New York City and listened to all these people saying what they wanted, and I'd done that, and it was looking very nice, and this was like my next opportunity. And I had taught high school in Florida, and as I said, I'd lived around the country. So this was my next move. I said, this is good, this is good. I think I should do this. So I set up my interviews and decided I would come here. Now my professor, she said, now I know I'm supposed to be bringing you back to Memphis to teach in our school system, but she said, I have to be honest, you belong in New York. And I said, ooh, even she recognizes this. Even she recognizes. She's still a dear, dear friend of mine. And so I took her strength and courage and said, yep, I think you're right. So I made my appointments, came here in June of 76, got those 5 interviews, and one in Boston and one in Atlanta. I had some job offers around the country from educators. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, all sorts of places wanted me to come be part of their teaching team. But I said, no, I don't think that's for me. I need more experience. Before I teach, I need to connect more in the industry. So I came to New York and started working. And then connected with FIT very quickly, which again, my work experience was of more value than any continuation of degrees. So I just continued my working experience. I had my own opportunity to be at Allied Stores, and then with a company called Teen Form Intimage, and working, that was very wonderful. I also did public relations for Jordache and launched their whole jeans company, which was fun to see in the exhibit downstairs, the pair of Jordache jeans. That was so cool. And also doing work with Fiorucci then, when I worked with Fiorucci, and had the chance to work with everybody from Cher to the Rolling Stones to Andy Warhol to all of these people who were connected in the disco era of the 80s, who came in there for their costumes, and projects and promotions that we did with them. And then I opened the store in Chicago, the Fiorucci store in Chicago, and had the most wonderful time because those were Americans making this happen in a Midwest city, and that was a quadruple thrill for me. And then the internship program started taking over my time and needing me more, and so then it was right. I had the bank of industry experience that I felt was valid and worthwhile. And again, I was more interested in big ideas and teaching and education over the business side of things. So, but we've kept clients. We still have had clients throughout the years, and are constantly being asked to help people do things. And we help people in the arts and music to promote their businesses. Early
experience. Almost everything I would do would be art and copy. And some of it got me in trouble. One of it was in grade school. The principal was Miss Walker, who never smiled. She was very tough. And so I did a portrait of her with that, and it strictly to give to the students, just for fun, because I was constantly turning out various types of publications. My father had bought me a mimeograph machine. Do you remember mimeograph?
Yes.
Remember that? I did. And so I could turn out, small editions of a newspaper, and one of them had a picture of her on it, and they expelled me from school. My mother had to fight with all of the
school boards,
2 school boards, in order to get me back into school.
Yeah.
But I was constantly doing art and copy. And I'm proud to say one thing, and maybe a few others, I hope. But one thing I'm very proud of. In my earliest experience in the advertising industry, advertising agency and so forth, women had no more than secretarial jobs and that type of thing. Women were not being asked to do copy, ideas, or that sort of thing. I changed it to some degree.
That's amazing.
I was friends with a lady who made history. Her name was Shirley Milton. She was one of the first women in various places.
Ad agencies.
Mainly with ad agencies, but you know, it might have happened in other industries and so forth, but in advertising, large as it was, to whoever had any job other than a minor secretary or something like that. And she and I wrote a book, because I believed in her, called The Creative Connection.
Oh, wow.
And it really worked, made a hit.
That's so
Because it
impressive.
made people realize she was a co-author. What?
Well, she had been the first vice president, I think, in an ad agency, the first female vice
Female.
president.
Yes.
Oh, and years
Hold
later.
on, hold on.
So speaking of some other contextual questions, what person had the most positive influence on your life?
I would say my mother.
Yes.
I remember her saying things like, you may be better off than someone else, but you are never better than
Oh, yeah.
someone else. And she always gave us the encouragement to where, well, a psychiatrist said to me one time, as in a casual situation, I've never gone to one, but anyway, in a casual situation, they said, I've never met someone who was so comfortable in their own skin. And so I can only go back to what my mother, who she says, I didn't know what I was doing. Your dad and I had no clue. We were just children. We grew up together. And she doesn't give herself any credit, but I give her tons of credit, because I really feel that she was so wise and philosophical in that sense.
Yes.
And so I would say that's my big influence.
Well, I have to give my mother and father equal credit
Okay.
for giving me help. They had the wonderful experience of owning and running a Hallmark store. There weren't that many, but a Hallmark store was quite a place to go to, you know, everything. My father would do magic shows in there, and my mother would holler at him, we've got customers in the front of the store. And he was showing magic shows to little kids, you know, make them happy. But they gave me the opportunity, because they were both very active in their store. Hallmark stores were quite a place to go to. There weren't that many, but wherever they were kind of a point of interest for anybody looking to do something original on
Yes.
their own and that type of thing.
And it was a communication,
yeah,
a connection, to a
right.
way of communicating
Right.
with others.
So I might say mother and father working together were an inspiration to me,
Beautiful.
each in their own way. And of course my father, it was wild, because he threw stuff at me that I never would have had. For instance, he was a magic man,
Yeah, you
in a
mentioned.
sense, and so he knew a lot of magicians. And he would have me doing portfolios and illustrating them and
Yes.
bringing in various types of stuff for groups of magicians and magic
Wonderful.
stuff. So he kept me, what you might say, experienced. He gave me
Yes.
experience.
Conditioned.
Right.
Right.
And my mother was very much involved in what you might call management. And she taught me a lot about what you could do to manage well
And very
and that type
important.
of thing. I think that.
Very
So I've got a lot of gratitude for both my parents.
Well, speaking of influences, I'd be remiss if, as a librarian, not to ask you
Yeah.
what book influenced you the most.
Well, I had fun thinking about that, because it's always nice when so many things pass through your life and you forget a lot of things. But I had to make note of a few. So, Notes to Myself by Hugh Prather was one that really I have shared with my grandson, because he and I have a similar way of thinking about certain things, and it was fun to share that with him. Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, which your daughter, Nancy, gave us the idea to read this book, which is about a gorilla who communicates telepathically with someone he's training to be more observant of what humans are doing to this planet.
Gosh.
It is absolutely one of them. It's a kind of book that your life before you read it and your life after you've read it.
And her field is neuropsychiatry.
Yeah, so
She's
that
a medical
book.
doctor, but she has specialized in neuropsychiatry.
So the other one then along those lines is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman.
Well
And that, again, if I hadn't been at FIT and taken this career, if it had come in to me at another time, I would have latched onto him, and that would have been what I would like to teach. And now, I just heard that they're putting, I don't know if it's his work, but emotional intelligence courses into more and more schools for students to be able to understand how to control their own emotions and their anger and, anger management, that type of thing, taking it even to that level.
And use emotions for positive things.
Positive,
Yes.
turn it to
Yes.
positive instead of negative
Absolutely.
rage and things like that. So those were mine. What book did you have?
Do any titles come to mind?
That didn't.
Well, I mean, I know we shared Ishmael and Emotional Intelligence, but in your own background, what book did you love as a kid?
Well, maybe this won't be as exhilarating, but it was a trade book in advertising, which I got to know the author in later years, and he asked me, because whatever experience I had, to write a chapter for the book, and that started my writing.
Yes.
And it's a book that was very much used in all through college programs which taught advertising and marketing. And I had my first experience in writing, and he encouraged me and helped me. That was Nat
Net
Axelrod.
and Stan Goodman?
Yeah, and Stanley
And Stan
Goodman.
Yeah,
Oh,
Stan Goodman.
wow, okay.
A favorite of mine. He was a, what you
Early
might say,
professor in the fashion buying
I
department.
mean, he was what you might say a pioneer, a
Okay.
wonderful pioneer. Stanley Goodman, well known.
Well,
His
we've done a
wife was
lot-
also.
Sorry, didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you. We've done a lot of reflecting. I want to ask you now, what are your future plans?
Oh, that's a good question. Well,
We're enjoying life in New York and in Arizona, and we have a place in Scottsdale and a place in Woodstock, and so we have family in both areas, so we're still committed to being with our families.
yeah, and publishing may be what is going to be our major thing. I have several thousand drawings
Yeah.
I've
Really?
made. They're just all over the place.
Oh, my.
Can
We
you,
have,
you can't show
we
them,
have,
can
I
you?
don't know if you can, I'll bring them
I
up
mean,
while you tell the
I've
story.
done artwork, if you could call it artwork. I've done drawings on almost everything you can think of. In fact, Peggy and I have started something called the comment strip.
Comment strip.
Not comic strip. And in there, my characters make statements that ordinarily you couldn't do about what's happening in the world.
Oh, goodness.
And various things that we do. We're feeling some wonderful anxiety about a lot of things that are happening. Do you have
Well-
a picture of any of my stuff?
My question is what I would, what I can share.
I've done quite a bit of drawing and painting and.
We did an
my
exhibit
hobby.
of his work. He has oil paintings through early in his art career
You show 'em the one I
as
did for
well.
you?
I don't know if this will come up. Can you
It'll
can
come
you
up.
pick this
There
up
it is.
on? Okay,
I did this for Peggy. This is
Wait a
an
minute.
oil painting
people are trying to call me. So there we are.
I did for Peggy.
So I don't know if you can.
It's about that big. Can you see it?
Yes.
And the colors are more vivid
sure?
in,
Yeah,
in
you
real
know, you
life.
see
It's
the
an
colors.
ocean scene.
Beautiful.
And so we had an exhibit, but he's famous for his cocktail napkins.
I draw everywhere I am.
So you'd have to get in close on this. I don't know if you can do that or not. Those are individual, throughout the world, whether it's on a butcher block, butcher paper on a table or cocktail napkins. He's drawn pictures of me as we've traveled around the world in various stages of our travels in life. And And so we had one man, one woman was one wall. And then we had characters from Woodstock, various musicians we know, and we had a whole panel wall of all of those. And I coordinated them so that they'd have thematic flow.
Nice.
And also we did a blog. We taught in professional studies. We forgot to mention that. Once in 91, when we both decided it was time to let our chairmanships go, and they were inviting us to go around the world, and it was hard to do both. So we did our international projects. And then Joan Volpe, we had been involved with her and her predecessors doing a lot of seminars for the industry. So between Georgiana Appignani with International Affairs and Joan with all of the industry SOS programs. So we would do conferences for industry and for students. And then we started teaching. Once she developed more courses, we started doing the brand marketing courses in professional studies. And we did that all the way up till a year ago, May.
Oh my goodness.
So we have been doing all of that.
Yes.
And then also Arthur and we produced a poetry book where Arthur took the poems, if I can find this, Arthur took the poems of a friend of ours and who had started writing poetry after the BP oil spill, and it made him very angry. And it started his process of emoting through poetry. And he started studying writing and all of that. So up in Woodstock, we have a friend who, with his poems, we brought that into the art show. And we would put Arthur's drawings next to it. And then I said, kind of like in Judy Garland and what's his name? Andy Rooney, not Rooney.
Who?
Andy
Rooney?
No. Anyway, her counterpart, where he said, let's make a show. Let's make a show. Well, we said, let's make a book. We've had this art show. We should, make this into something solid that we could share.
See?
So here's
a quick, I do a drawing.
right here on the spot.
Wow.
Give it to a close up. Can you read it?
She's doing it with the camera, honey.
Yes. Oh,
3 minutes.
wonderful.
Now let me find the.
See, he's
Let me
saying, how do you
find
know
the
that I
book.
love you? And she says, it's part of what you did at FIT. And there they are.
It's perfect. Perfect.
Of course, when I want to find something, what category is it
While
under?
you're looking for that, I just want to ask one last question.
Yeah.
What would you like for people to remember about you?
Wow, what a
And
question.
if we could sort of construct it around your life here at FIT,
Yeah.
that would be fantastic.
That is the hard thing because I know time passes so quickly that most people don't even know that I was so responsible for the internship program. And there's only one or two people or half a dozen people of the faculty that I had teaching my courses and working with me that are even still here. So time passes and you go, where's my name on the plaque somewhere, that kind of thing. It's not the Peggy Winters or Peggy Fincher Winters internship program, and it shouldn't be. But again, I just hope that somewhere, I know in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students who were my interns, when I meet them out in the streets, as we do often, that you started my life. You helped me make that connection. I got started. Or that was a great start, but it taught me I didn't want to do that, and now I'm doing this.
Tremendous.
And so that help that I was able to do, whether it was in the advertising courses I taught or in the internship, but mainly the internship, because again, that was my whole background of getting that practical start in life.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Arthur?
How would you answer that question? How do you want people to remember you?
To remember you here at FIT.
Here at FIT?
Yes, sir.
The same, I think, with your advertising and marketing communications department, being the founder of it, and all of the people who are there now have to thank you.
I would like to be remembered. When I came to, one of the reasons I was able to come to FIT is that FIT, I felt, needed more in marketing and communications. And it was doing a great job. But I wanted to, and I helped start a separate college from fashion design and that type of thing, which taught marketing and communications and so forth. And I felt that it would be marvelous if FIT could have two colleges. One that concentrated on the product and the other that concentrated on the service.
Amazing.
And that was what I worked at. Wow. And I feel so good about the fact that that both colleges have done so well.
And they really
each
have.
In their own way, but together.
Yes.
There have been an interaction. There had to be. I didn't want to separate them. I wanted just to give two ways for a student to go. And there was, one of the things that I helped create was certification education. And I was one of the pioneers in that. And I wanted to do whatever I could to give people an opportunity to develop what they had as skill and desire to use it in various ways. And it was so wonderful to be in an institution that encouraged some of the leaders. I mean, I remember all the days I spent with Shirley Goodman, with Joyce later on, and of course with Marvin Feldman.
Very good.
We spent a lot of time. And FIT has become something we all know of wonderful value.
Yes. Oh, it's always been wonderful as we travel across the world. Yes. I remember one time we were in Israel, and we were at the museum, and across this huge entryway, it was like a football field. And across the way, we saw this huge shirt, FIT. And of course, we had to approach. And it was one of our recent graduates. And again, everywhere we've been, there's some connection. Or the people from China who would come, and they would come with a photograph of themselves with us. And they would say, "Do you remember me? Do you remember me?" And sure, yeah, that was not last year. You were in New York. And it's like, out of thousands of people, we always say, from what walk of life do I know you?
Yes.
If someone approaches us and says, "Do you remember me?" All right, now let's connect.
Yes.
Was it FIT? Was it industry? Was it,
Well,
where?
New York's a busy place. If Peggy and I sit on a certain bench on 34th Street,
Yeah, this was funny. Just the other day.
It never fails that somebody doesn't stop to talk with us.
Say, "Oh, hi, we haven't seen you in ages."
Because, when you're teaching all these years, you meet a lot of people.
Thousands and thousands.
Yeah, there are so many and New York is, a place where certain parts of the city are well traveled. Like 34th Street and so forth, right?
Exactly.
And we can't ever sit on a certain chair, a certain bench rather, and not have
Somewhere in the city.
something of a meeting of some sort.
Or that time we were at the Algonquin.
I love it.
We were at the Algonquin at a music event, and we're sitting in having dinner, and this lady keeps going back and forth, and she keeps looking at us, and we're like, Finally, she stops and she says, "Now, you're not going to remember me, but in 1969, I was your student. I don't look anything like I did then. How come you still look like you did then?"
She was one of my early students.
Then we, went back over the who, what, when, and where, and again, one of those, and that was many, many years. That was like 30, at least 30 years between.
Oh, a long time.
Yeah,
I'm only 94 now. I mean, I feel if they recognize me, that's because, I'm lucky.
Very good. Well, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today.
Our delight. Well, thank you for inviting us.
It's been a treat for me, and I know it will be for viewers as well. So
Well, we look forward to seeing the results. That'll be fun.
We'll send it to you as soon as it's ready.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.